Hello and welcome to the Why Not Her podcast. Today we are discussing parenthood, how to reach the decision on whether or not to have children, and also the obstacles that we may face upon choosing to become parents, especially during one of the biggest global pandemics in modern history, COVID-19. My guests today delve into these issues, and they are Linda Kelly, who is the current media spokesperson for the Better Maternity Care campaign, which is focused on the experience of women attending maternity services during COVID-19. We also have Margaret O'Connor, who has been working as a counsellor and psychotherapist for over a decade. She strongly believes that people can make decisions and address issues in their lives once they have time, space and support to do so. One of Margaret's main aims in her professional career is to help those who are unsure about parenthood, for whatever reason, to make the right decision for them by providing information and an independent, non-judgmental space. So for anyone out there that is in a couple, or if you're single and you have reached a point in your life where you're thinking about having kids, let's just start this conversation and see what the best options for you are and what trials and tribulations that you may face as well. It's lovely to have you here today, Margaret, and Linda is going to join us a little bit later on. I suppose the main thing of what we'll kind of broach on today is to talk about women's place in society over the last number of years, with the rise of women's independence and intersectional feminism. Some choose to have children, some choose not to have children, and some are really ostracized if they do. And sometimes if a woman reaches a certain age, they're constantly reminded that their biological clock is ticking and that it's their place to procreate. I have sisters myself and a lot of friends that have had children and families, and even though they know me very well, they, kind of remind me anytime I'm back in Ireland. How do you feel that in today's society, where does a woman's choice lie, and where does the societal pressure of shaping a woman's choice come into the equation?
It's a huge question because there's so many things, I think, intersecting and influencing this. And on the one hand, it seems quite straightforward. It's like the choice to maybe control our fertility or choose not to have children. So it seems that it should be relatively straightforward on that side. Then in reality, anyone who tries to do that will know that it is much more complicated than that. So there's a lot of factors. And, practically, there's just a lot of factors. I said I like to think of it, I suppose, more of a continuum. There are some people who are really, really sure that they want to be parents. There are people who are really, really sure they do not want to be parents. And there's a huge area in between of people who are unsure or who are affected by life circumstances. Obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic at the moment, and that has had a huge impact, and there can be a whole range of factors that can impact. So, unfortunately, even the language we have is not particularly useful, and I think it makes it seem very clear cut, and you're either in this camp or that camp. Totally happy about it wherever you are, and there's no in between, and it's just not the case. There's much more grey area and nuance in this, I think. So it's just to acknowledge that. It is hard, I suppose. I find it hard sometimes to speak in generalizations because it's such an individual situation, and everybody's experience of it will be very different. But I suppose, again, we have this idea that, there are so many factors come together at different times for different people in their own particular circumstances. So like that, for some people, there's just no process. They actually don't think about it. They're absolutely sure they either do want or don't want kids. And that's not even really a decision to them. They just kind of know that. And some people might know that quite early on. Some people come to that later on. And that just kind of is what it is. And they continue on from there. For other people, that's much more uncertain. They might change their minds, over and back. It might depend on life circumstances again, to move between those positions. And then for some people, they're forced to make that decision.
Yeah.
Again, it might be for life events. It might be through illness or a health treatment, or again, like what we're looking at the moment, with all the different circumstances affecting people. So they're all really, really different circumstances. Then the people that I might meet are the people who are saying, I don't think I want them. I don't think I want children, but should I?
Yeah. And of course, age is probably a big factor as well, because as I just said there, anytime I go back to Ireland,
I meet with my sisters, I meet with my mum, and even when my grandmother was alive, you know, she was like, now Linda, the clock is ticking, you know, it's time to think about when you're going to have kids. And, you know, it's that pressure that I feel that there is a societal pressure on women as well. But from my perspective, I'm kind of like, well, career is very important to me. It's ambition is very important. It's always been what's taken the precipice over everything else. And having a family, it's say my own personal views, I just don't think that I could fit that in and allocate that into everything else that I'm doing. And I know that other people are completely different and they can, and they're great multitaskers and they can, you know, facilitate all that. So what's the average kind of when a person kind of comes and chats to you and kind of says, right, you know, what are the obstacles that many face, or what is the kind of, you know, the roadmap, if you will, into either planning a family or deciding to, you know, let's not do this. And I'm totally aware as well of people in relationships where they get to a certain point, especially heteronormative relationships, where a man and a woman are together for a certain period of time and it's just expected of them to have children. But yet sometimes they might not want to, or sometimes one of the partners might not want to, and then that will result in either a breakup in the relationship, and then you have to look at the state of the relationship and at what stage the relationship is at. So if obviously there's never really an easy way to kind of go, right, this is from A to B, like, but what would be the kind of I suppose this the suggested roadmap to navigating that as a couple? And obviously there's people that have children that are single as well. So what would be kind of advice there that you'd have?
Oh, I like really basically talk about it. You know, I and I know that, like, I don't mean that flippantly, but like I would have couples who come to me who have genuinely never talked about it, and you know, they might be married, they might be together a long time, they haven't actually had the conversation. And I think this goes back to how assumed it is. The assumption is that everybody will and wants to have children at some point their life. So if that's the norm, that's what we see in ads, that's what that policy is worked towards. And the only reason you won't do that is because you can't. And that's excused to a point. But if you choose not to, that's very strange, you know, basically. That doesn't make sense on a social side. So you know, that assumption that can influence on an individual level. You know, I often have clients as well who assumed they would have children later on and in their 20s. Oh yeah, later on now in my 30s, and they get to their 30s, and oh yeah, later on now when I'm in my late 30s. And you know, then it becomes more of that forced decision of, well, like, I have to make my mind up now, kind of one way or the other. But they haven't actually stopped to question, do I want to have children? That assumption is so strong, and kind of all the signposts you're looking at are telling you that's the direction you're going to go in. It's really, really hard then to kind of just even pause for a minute and kind of think, well, do I, you know, is this what I want? Is this what we want? And trying to figure out what might life look like if we don't do that, or if I don't do that.
Yeah,
that takes a lot of self-awareness. It takes you know, some courage and being able to maybe just think about it. So for some people, you know, they're genuinely not even aware that that's a choice, you know, they'll know it on an intellectual level, but you know, applying it to themselves, that can be quite challenging. So yeah, talking about it, you know, giving yourself a chance, I suppose, as early as you can, you know, taking time to reflect and look at it, and you know, look at your social circle, look at your own family background. All of these factors come into play. Your own experience of family, your own personal development. You know, do you feel ready to be a parent? Do you see yourself, you know, you often hear people saying, you know, am I the adult here? Do we feel grown up enough to take on that role? Are there, you know, physical and mental health, you know, are mentioned a lot. People really put so much thought and effort. They want to be the best parent they can be. If they're going to go down that road, and if they think something might prevent them from doing that, you know, they take it very seriously, and they're the kinds of conversations we'd be having. Practically, you know, obviously financial stability, accommodation. You know, these are huge factors for people if they're in insecure accommodation, precarious employment. It's very hard to plan and to find a good time that you can plan ahead and you know, be in a more certain state. Being near to family and friends, having a support network is very important to people as well. So again, that may or may not be possible depending on where you are. And I suppose, you know, it's interesting. I did some research. And it was back in 2017. It's not that long ago. But you know, when I spoke to Irish women to see what they considered, and environmental reasons didn't come up at all.
Right.
And now it was just really interesting. Like in the last year or two, you know, for some people, environmental reasons are key, or they're certainly part of the thinking around it as well. Both in terms of kind of the impact that, you know, increasing the population will have, and also the type of world they're might be bringing a child into. So it's changing, you know, I think it's changing quite rapidly, and people really are giving this, you know, really serious thought. But there's, as I said, there's all those things interacting for each individual, and how that lands with them as well. Then, and I suppose something I found in my research was that if people wanted to be a parent enough, if the motivation was strong enough, then they'd put effort into putting those things in place, you know, planning, maybe we'll move to be nearer family, or I'll, you know, take working arrangements if I can, or whatever it is. But if that motivation either wasn't there or wasn't strong enough, then the motivation to do those things, you know, kind of wasn't there as much either. So the actual desire and want to be a parent, you know, is still really important, and that's not always a given as we might expect it to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think with regards to people that I know that I've grew up with, and friends and family, and I've noticed just this sharp focus that it brings to people's lives when they do have children. And a lot of the time, I've heard this so many times with friends, you know, especially if they had, you know, difficult backgrounds, that they want to create a better home and a better safety network and environment for their children that they may not have had. But then I won't see them going to therapy, or I won't see them trying to heal their inner child. And, you know, I can sense the nervousness that they might have, but then there is also a reluctance to kind of invest in yourself, and then also have that duality of investing in someone that you're about to create as well. So what, for couples that say have chosen to, you know, we're going to go down this route, is it kind of brought up, or should it be a factor that, you need to look within? You know, you can be optimistic, but with reservations, and with them reservations, it's, you know, comes with loads of different feelings and, you know, ideas in your head about parenting. Like, what would be the best resources out there? Or do you feel that, you know, seeking counsel and properly dismantling different things that you have in your mind, especially if, you know, if you've come from a place of either a fragile childhood or even a really lovely childhood, you just want to ensure that you carry that on and you fulfill that in your own parent role.
Yeah, Joe, I think it's a really good point. I think this is the point. I think parenthood is so symbolically valued. It's put up there as this, you know, wonderful thing to do, and I'm not saying it's not, but then the level of practical support, which I'm sure Linda will tell us a little bit more about, it is not generally not really there, or not there enough. So this assumption that you will just become a parent and that you don't really have to do anything prepare yourself for that is so unhelpful, because, you know, the difference between the expectation of it and the reality of it can be so different. And regardless, you know, as you said, regardless of your background, I think it is just a huge life transition. You know, it can be, you know, to have a little mini version of yourself can be very triggering. You know?
I wouldn't put that level of Antichrist onto the world.
You know. So, you know, and obviously I'm a therapist, so I'm biased, and I think, yes, everyone should go for counselling. But I do agree, it would be very, very helpful if people were able, you know, to have more of a transition to, you know, in an ideal world, be prepared and have the time and resources to do that, both individually and as a couple, because it's all about communication. It's all about, you know, knowing yourself, knowing your patterns, and knowing, okay, how is that going to be when I'm sleep deprived and very busy, and all the other things that come with it. So absolutely, I think it would be wonderful for people to have that support and give that support to themselves. But I suppose ironically, it's like the lack of time, and then the focus, that focus shifts, that, and obviously this makes sense, that the focus should be on the child and all the child's needs, but the parents often get left out of that equation entirely, and that's not helpful at all. But again, this is kind of the model that we're given, really, which that is really unhelpful to everyone.
Yeah, I think assistance, like just key words that you said there, like kind of assistance, support, and granted, if you've reached that stage where you're like, you know what, children isn't for me, and you're going down another route, but say you decide to have children, you're ready to start a family, you looked at that study in 2017 and conducted some research yourself, and then fast forward to 2021, where we're in COVID, we're in the biggest global pandemic, where in terms of the assistance and the key factors in you reach the stage with a partner or a spouse or on your own, and you decide to go down that path, and you're like, you know what, ready to start a family, or you're ready to have another child, and then smack bam, the world just does what it does and spins on its axle, and we're suddenly in this global pandemic. There's a lot of things that have changed, and in terms of support and assistance, who better to ask than Linda Kelly from the Better Maternity Care campaign? Over to you, Linda.
Yeah, so I was pregnant when COVID hit with my second child, and it's interesting listening to Margaret speak there about all of the choices that are facing people around whether or not to start a family. And I have polycystic ovary syndrome, and I've known I've had that since I was 20. And before we got married, I said to my husband, look, I just really want to go and see what the story is and what the position is, because like I rarely get periods, like ever, rarely. So most of my friends are like, you lucky duck.
I envy
you. And I like, but obviously you kind of, when you know the basics of reproduction, that potentially is an issue. And we kind of went to a pretty prominent fertility doctor. He was like, you're never going to get pregnant naturally. Like, it's really unlikely, obviously he didn't say never, but he was like, it's really, really unlikely or whatever. And then I got pregnant with my first girl. That was a surprise. And then after, what happened was I decided to stop using hormonal contraception because I didn't feel it was good. And then suddenly 4 months later, I was pregnant again with my second baby. And sometimes choice is taken out of your hands in a way, because your body reacts to things. And so it was a bit of a surprise to find ourselves pregnant again so quickly. And then, so we kind of had adjusted to that. And then I had to get my appendix out while I was pregnant.
Oh, wow.
Before COVID hit. And that comes with a whole load of concerns around anesthetic and stuff, and we got through that. And I was just about to go back to work and COVID hit, and there I was like midway through my pregnancy, and I was like, what is happening? That kind of question we've all asked ourselves so much over the last 2 years, what is happening? And so very quickly things shut down from a maternity care perspective. So my husband couldn't come to the anomaly scan. They wouldn't let me video call him. I was on my own for the rest of the pregnancy. No opportunity at all for him to come to any appointment. And we had a very difficult birth experience with our first daughter. So we were much more anxious, much more nervous. And we knew what we were missing as well this time around, because he had been so involved the first time. And then what happened, I was due in July 2020, and before, probably in around May, the country was opening up again. And, we were all this big reopening plan, we were all this living with COVID plan. It was the original one. I know we've been through like a few iterations of it now. And the Dublin maternity hospitals were all changing their rules, and partners were being slowly but surely welcomed back into hospitals to accompany people for greater durations during labour and on the wards. But nothing was happening in Cork, even though it's the newest maternity hospital in the state. And I was like trying to contact the hospital, no response. Nobody would reply to emails. Nobody would respond on social media. Nobody, like, reception would just put you off. And I remember going into my 36-week appointment, and like you go through the gamut of it, because like for so long I had just kind of made myself understand that I would be totally on my own. And then suddenly the hope came back in because everything was opening up and they were talking about pubs and gag games and all of that. And the doctor just looked at me at the start of because the first question I asked was, what's the story like? And she just looked at me and she went, you should have no expectation that your husband will be allowed to visit you in the hospital. And it just...
It's devastating. It's moments in time that you're never getting back.
It's particular, like, it's just very cruel and it's very barbaric. And I think, fast forward a few months, like, we got through it in a sense, like, as in we just had to. And then a few months later, somebody set up a petition, somebody I didn't know, and I saw it, and it was like somebody had thrown me a lifeline, because I didn't want anybody to go through what we had gone through. And in particular, like, it was our second child. So in one sense, it was worse because we knew what we were missing. But in another way, then I just couldn't imagine having, we'd say, the experience I had with my first daughter, somebody having that experience under COVID, in terms of a really difficult induction, really difficult birth, and having to do that on your own. And I mean, I was heartbroken. And so many of my friends, like we're talking about that age, like so many of my friends are of that age. Lots of people are deciding to have children. And every time somebody would tell me they were pregnant, my heart would just break for them, because I knew what they were facing.
And there were so many people having babies over COVID, and I think
there's so many, like 60,000 live births in Ireland every year, and that doesn't count for anybody who goes through pregnancy loss or anybody who has a stillbirth. So it's actually it's actually an underestimation of the amount of women and their partners who use maternity services in Ireland. So we decided to get together. So there's 6 of us, and we started with Caroline's petition. Then we handed in that petition, and it just kind of snowballed from there. And we were just making some progress on it last November, and the HSE came back around and said, we let partners back in for the 20-week scan, which is called the anomaly scan, or the big scan. And that was movement, and hospitals didn't implement it. And then we were straight into the third surge, and we had to kind of pause to just allow the health service to deal with that surge, because it was very, very difficult. And then we were out of that again, and suddenly we were back to talking about pubs opening. We were back to talking about gag games, and there was nobody talking about maternity hospitals, and I thought I was going crazy.
Yeah, it's ludicrous. It is. I mean, it's so frustrating that women, once again, are left out of the equation when it comes to, their rights, what they're entitled to. And I suppose from that, the push for the Better Maternity Care campaign, really, you all really thought then, this is something that we really have to push out here, because from what I can gather, there wasn't much support from that point onwards, because people were campaigning for the GAA games, and they were campaigning for this and that, and the nightclubs to be open. But again, the people that were creating life and creating Irish citizens weren't even in the equation. So how did that feel? Like, how did that, how does that affect somebody, especially if you're within that group, within that community where you are pregnant, or you have just gone through pregnancy, and you've gone through, the ordeal of not having your partner present, and then missing out on valuable moments that you're never going to get back. I mean, how did that feel?
I think there's 2 overwhelming feelings, 3 maybe, that I would say over the course of this experience. The first, I think, is just feeling so dehumanized by the hospital, who wouldn't even deign to give you a response. Like, the hospitals just shut down. They wouldn't, and they still to a certain extent are in this space. They won't reply to people. They won't answer like normal, legitimate queries. This isn't, anyone going on a hunt for anybody on social media, but like asking just serious, legitimate questions about their risk assessments, about their balance of risk and benefit in the scenario. No answer at all. And it just makes you feel utterly dehumanized. And then there is an anger that is just so deep inside my soul at how women have been treated right throughout this pandemic. So like the maternity services are a symptom of a bigger problem, and a really visceral one. And it's such a transformative time in your life. And Margaret was talking about that transition earlier. Like it is probably one of the biggest transformations you will ever experience as an adult. And that it was like, it wasn't even important enough for them to think about it. It's not that there was any sort of malice. It's not that they kind of went out of their way to make it difficult or anything like that. It wasn't even on their radar. Like they just didn't even think about it, which is actually almost worse, because you're so unimportant as a woman in this country that you don't even make it onto the agenda. And that makes me really, really angry. And like, you know, as I often say to my husband, I'm like, there are fires like burning in me for what I have experienced during COVID. Yeah. That will, and it's not even just that, it's also about the fact that they shut down childcare, they shut down everything. They expected everybody to work from home, to care for children, to do all of that fell predominantly on women. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we were very lucky. Now we have a good balance and we were able to get things set up. But, you know, for lots and lots of women, COVID has been detrimental to their life.
Huge. And I mean, this assaults have gone up, you know, domestic violence has gone up. I mean, there's a lot.
Like, it's domestic violence. It's the fact that women are in precarious work. More women are in the health service. They're more at risk of long COVID. Jobs that were lost in, you know, were predominantly female sector. And so there's all of that. So like, I think, and like what the sense I get from my friends is that women are angry and women are getting political in a way that they haven't before. And then the other feeling that I would say that these restrictions in particular, like, it is a loneliness that cannot be put into words. And it took, like, I mean, I spent 3 days in the hospital on my own. My husband came in for the operation. He was sent out afterwards. I didn't see him again until I was discharged, and somebody carried the baby for me downstairs and out to him. It took 15 months for me to actually be able to describe what that weekend was like. And it's not that anybody did anything to me. It's not that anything particularly bad happened, but it is this depth of loneliness at such a vulnerable point in time. And that is something that, you know, you don't get over that. You carry that. Like, you can go to therapy, you can go to counselling, which I have done after my first birth of my first daughter, because it was so difficult. But you like, that is your experience, and you always have it and hold it. And I've gotten so many messages from women in better maternity care who are delaying having more children because of the restrictions, who had such a bad experience they will never have any more children. And that's not a way. Like, we are a resource rich country. And there is absolutely no reason in the world why we should have this scenario for women in our maternity services. But yet it is utterly controlled by men, you know, in all of the senior management teams, in all of the senior decision-making positions. And the Cabinet Subcommittee on COVID is exclusively male. And even though attention has been brought to that, like, they're still ploughing on with their rugby matches in the Aviva, despite the fact that the schools are hotbeds of COVID. No filters in schools, no filters in indoor places, no listening to the experience of women who are at the coalface of this pandemic in a way that other people aren't. And that is just something that is unforgivable at this stage of the pandemic.
And in terms of the compliance, Linda, and the situation with regards to hospitals now, and, you know, the national guidelines, where is it now? So, you know, for anyone listening in that's, you know, either discussing having a baby, thinking about having a baby, you know, where do things lie now? Because I know you have had certain significant breakthroughs in the last few weeks. Like, what's the situation now?
So we're at the end of November now, and it's been a month since the guidelines were issued, and actually new guidelines came into place today. And so the situation is that in the main, in most hospitals, what will happen is, for all of your antenatal care, you are on your own. So partner access is still completely restricted for most of your antenatal care, except for 2 scans, the 12-week scan and the 20-week scan. And your partner can attend for those. Then when you come to labour by and large is unrestricted access, except for in 2 hospitals, which is Letterkenny and Waterford. Now, I say that as a general kind of statement. There are details to that. So like it depends on what time of day you go into labour, when you go into the hospital. Most hospitals now have access for partners between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. And then if you go in the middle of the night, if you go straight to a delivery room, you have your partner with you. But if you go to a multi-bed ward, your partner will typically be asked to go home, which was the case before COVID, but there was a lot more flexibility in the system before COVID. That isn't there now. And then like for postpartum checks, like so your 2-week check, your 6-week check, like it's a very hit and miss if people are actually getting those. And it's very difficult as well. So I have heard stories of people being readmitted into the maternity hospitals for whatever reason. Maybe they're bleeding heavily, stitches need checked or whatever, and their newborn baby is being separated from them and being told that you can't stay outside. And there's some ongoing issues with NICU. So we meet with the HSE regularly, and we're engaged with them. So our next meeting with them is the 8th of December. We have asked them to look at the antenatal care aspect of it, because it is a massive part of your pregnancy journey. But I think given the numbers at the moment, I think it would be foolish to expect that that's going to improve, you know, because they're one of the unsafest aspects of maternity care in the country, and were pre-COVID as well. And so like lots of things, COVID has only exposed what were extremely faulty systems to begin with.
Oh my God. I mean, it's awful. Margaret, from your perspective as a therapist, I mean, this is a serious traumatic period in Irish history for women yet again. And as Linda so eloquently described, the nuances and the effects, the detrimental effects that this system, that's currently in place has on women and their partners. What advice or what would you suggest in coping mechanisms during times like this, or how to overcome the anxiety that it brings?
It's difficult. I'm here. I'm nodding my head frantically with everything that Linda said, and it is the word traumatic absolutely comes to mind, because it's at a time when you're feeling your most vulnerable. You're dependent on other people to make decisions and be there, and you're impacted by external factors in such a deeply personal way. I suppose it's trying to rally as much support as you can for yourself, and trying to resource yourself as much as possible, but it's very, very challenging. And the difficulty is, that once you have a new baby, obviously it's hard to find time for yourself, but it's so, so important, possibly again, just anyway, but if there has been any kind of difficulty, in the labor, the pregnancy process, okay, I know I'm like a broken record. I suppose you'd hope that therapy would help, because it's such a personal thing. It could be peer support, linking with other women, because the word that stood out for me is isolation. And, I'm hearing that, it's obviously very intense in that situation, but I think women feel very isolated around the whole topic anyway. Again, I know it was a small bit of research that I did, but women, I spoke to 15 women and who hadn't had children yet, and some wanted to and some didn't. They all felt isolated in the process. Nobody felt actually supported, either the women that intended to have children at some point or the women that didn't. So the system is not working for anybody, and it's nothing to do with parents versus non-parents or any of that. This just isn't working at all. And to have people feel so isolated and so vulnerable is traumatic, and really, really needs to be addressed from a systemic point of view. It's not new, unfortunately, but it's just so obvious now. It's really distressing to think about, to be honest.
I think what Margaret's saying there is so true about connecting with each other, because it's one of the things that I've been so proud of for the Better Maternity care campaign is that, like, obviously we achieved our outcome, you know what I mean, in lots of ways. Like there's still things to be fought for, but you know, our main goal was to get partners back in, and by and large we have been able to do that. But that has almost become incidental to the community of women that we have created. And what I have found really powerful is that when you think about maybe why people haven't mobilized on maternity care before, kind of people, I think, broadly fell into two categories. One is that if you had an okay enough journey, like pregnancy journey and birth, then you were busy with a small baby, and you kind of, you know, you didn't really maybe see the need for a massive change because everything had gone okay or by the book. And then if you didn't, and if you had a traumatic experience, it's extremely difficult to put yourself in a space to campaign for change about something that caused you great harm and something that caused you trauma. And I think one of the things about our campaign is it has brought people together who have experienced both sides of that, and where people have been able to say, well, whether my experience was good or whether my experience was extremely negative, actually this system isn't working for anybody, and we're going to improve it for everybody, so that if there's another pandemic, or just if we're like getting back to normal maternity services, what was acceptable before COVID is no longer acceptable to us as the standard of maternity care in this country. And that is from women coming together and talking to each other and breaking down that sort of isolation of, like, you know, like Margaret has said so much at the start of the podcast about like all the expectations that are around motherhood in particular. I love the word parenthood, because I think it's so much more egalitarian, because we're obsessed with motherhood in Ireland. And so like just by osmosis, you take in all of this sort of cultural norm about motherhood and what you're meant to feel about being a mother and what you're meant to, all of those things, none of which I felt, and which make you feel so much worse when then you find yourself in that transition period of new parenthood going, what the absolute F is going on? And I think the fact that women are talking to each other now and collaborating on this and connecting on this and campaigning on this, it is the only antidote to the isolation. It's the only one. And I think the more that we keep doing it, like talking on podcasts like this, mobilizing on social media, whether it's a march or whether it's an Instagram live, they all have power. And it's about not actually staying in that silence anymore. And I think that's hugely powerful.
It is. I mean, it's that sense of camaraderie and that sense of solidarity. And something that I did see and notice in your campaign was men. You know, men were present. They showed up. And I think with anything where there is huge issues concerning women, societal issues, political issues, socioeconomical issues, it's important that, you know, the men turn up, and because what affects women affects men, what affects men affects women. And it's that kind of, you know, the notion where in Ireland it's all about, you know, well, if you have a child, you know, as a woman, that's it, like that's your but if a man has a child, his life continues as it was. And that notion still exists to this day. And I'm just absolutely flabbergasted at that sometimes, because it's two people to make a baby. And, you know, it should be the sense of, you know, it's a joint effort. It's a joint parenting module. Everything that you go into should be done together. And with that in mind, like I was reading up about maternity and paternity leave. And in America, they don't have any paid leave for the fathers. Nothing. It doesn't exist. There's no federal offering of any paid leave at all when it comes to the fathers. And I think, you know, in Ireland, Jesus, we're behind in Ireland, but I was shocked to see that in the United States. I mean, where does that lie in Ireland?
Well, actually, interestingly, we don't have paid maternity leave in Ireland. Actually, what we have is we have a social welfare payment that's available to people. Yeah. And that's a certain amount, but actually less than 50% of women actually get that topped up. And that's a statistic that people don't hear very often, because we talk about paid maternity leave, but it's, you know, it's a state payment. It's not your employer paying it. And actually, you know, less than 50% of employers pay the top up. So there's huge financial barriers to being able to access leave in Ireland as well, even though it's not as severe as the state. But improvements are being made. So in Ireland, what you have is you have a period of maternity leave whereby you get this social welfare payment, and depending on your employer, you may get your top up to the rest of your salary. Then you have an option of 16 weeks unpaid leave that you can take. Your holidays and things like that, entitlements roll over. Then there is a new leave. And this is where it gets confusing for people, because there's parents' leave and there's parental leave. And those two things are different. And these are available to both parents. So your parents' leave is a period of now 5 weeks, depending on, like, it's going back to children being born 1st November. It's either 2019 or 2020, I can't think off the top of my head. And you get 5 weeks, but again, it's a social welfare payment. So it's not necessarily your full pay. It's a social welfare payment of, I think it's 230, 240 a week. And that's available to both parents. And then you have parental leave, which is...
For a 5-week period.
Sorry?
For the 5-week period, then, is it?
Yeah, so for the 5-week period of the parents' leave, you can get a social welfare payment. Men who are parents get 2 weeks paternity leave on top of that with the same social welfare payment. And then that's everything that's paid. And after that, then both parents have access to 90 days parental leave up until a child is in mid-teenage years, which is the transposition of European law. So it's the parents' leave one is the newer one. And it, like, you know, the program for government is set to increase that and increase it. But we already know the fact that it's only a social welfare payment and it's not somebody's full salary is a barrier to people, because you're talking about a huge income drop if parents are availing of that. So if you have a 2-parent household, if you're renting anywhere in the country, I don't even have to say Dublin, if you're renting anywhere in the country and you have 2 salaries, and then one of you is going on maternity leave and you're not getting a top up, one of your salaries is already down to a social welfare payment. You're losing a huge proportion of your salary. And then for a second parent to take paternity leave or parents' leave may mean that both parents are down to a social welfare payment, which the choice is then, I'm not going to be able to pay my rent, or I'm not going to be able to save for childcare. And it's financially not an option for lots and lots of people. So we need to have a very serious conversation about resourcing that, because all of the evidence, all of the international literature shows that, you know, the first year of a child's life is hugely important in terms of developmental milestones and gains and all of that. And we should be doing everything possible to ensure that parents are able to take time out of work and to go be in that really transformative stage. And like, that's a societal good. Like, people go nuts at me when I say that, you know, like as if I'm advocating for people to go on a holiday for a year. It's absolutely not a holiday to parent small kids or babies. But like, the whole issue of public childcare, publicly available childcare, like, we have to tackle it and we have to get it right, because we will make infinite savings in terms of education outcomes, in terms of crime, all of those indicators of a healthy society all start with how much we invest in that really pivotal stage of childhood and early childhood. And like, can we not have that conversation?
And it's so important, Linda, because, you know, the citizensinformation.ie, by the way, for listeners, there's a lot of information that's available there, but a lot of people are afraid to ask these questions, you know. And you see, you know, we spoke about Planned Parenthood, and then obviously there's a lot of the times when, you know, babies just surprise you and you find yourself in a situation where, okay, I'm going to become a parent, whether it's solo or whether it's with your partner. And, you know, finances are a huge, huge factor into this, which can also lead some people to make the decision to not include the father on the birth cert. And, you know, by doing so, they will be open to various kinds of government financial assistance, rent assistance schemes.
And by doing so, they're actually renouncing the rights of the father. So for instance, if a child is sick, they can't go into the hospital with them. I mean, what's your views here? How do we tackle this, big issue within Irish society? Because we do see it happening an awful lot. And at the end of the day, it is taxpayers' money as well that's being given to certain families. What's your views on this, Linda?
I think it's not something that Better Maternity Care is actively looking at, but I think there are other groups who are looking at things like the definition of family, because there's a number of different tenets to it. Like there's obviously the financial aspect of it.
Yeah.
Also, there was changes in laws as well recently around birth cert registrations. But I was really struck by, I listened to Clodagh O'Hagan. She did a podcast on our Birthing a Nation podcast, and she talked about how difficult it was for her as a solo parent to find as a family. So I think there's so much that we need to do around this whole area, and I think it starts with talking about what do we value. And if we value women, and we center women, and if we value that kind of early childhood time, and if we value that people have families that don't look like a man and a woman and 3 or 4 kids anymore, like if we can value that and place that as the starting position, well then, like that's a good starting point. And then let's draw out the public services from that. Because I think that's the other thing, is we have to look at, why, like everything you said there, Linda, about, decisions people make about birth certs and all that, so much of that is around financial necessity.
Yeah, totally.
So much of it is. And so actually, if we make things financially viable for people, for the most vulnerable people in our society, as well as for everybody, no matter what socioeconomic status you're in, then we solve a lot of those problems that are derived from it. But this idea that we just address symptoms rather than actually address the cause is so problematic. We're not addressing the fact that women by and large are in precarious work in Ireland, that they're in low paid jobs. A lot of women in Ireland are in low paid jobs. And so then if they're deciding that they want to have a child, or they're in a family situation, that's a financial difficulty then, or a burden that it places on them. So what, everything is interconnected. And like what we find is that for women, it's all of these different intersections, and it's almost like death by 1,000 cuts. Like, because you just about get over the hump in one aspect. Maybe you decide you want a solo parent, and you get through all of those things, and then suddenly your precarious job decides, well, actually, no, I don't want you here now because you're pregnant, or I'm not going to ask you back, or your hours are going to take a shift. And suddenly all of the plans that you made that were based on your previously stable job are out the window. So it's really difficult. And I think one of the things we have to do after COVID is we have to show people that there is a better way to organize society for women.
Yeah, totally. I mean, in one of the podcasts that will be out this month as well, I speak to some of the people that were behind repeal the 8th as well, because not all pregnancies result in following through on it. There's options there. And I think it's very important to just look at how that has been treated as well in Ireland, and how women were told they could be afforded this, and this was an option, but it still hasn't been put properly and adequately into place to safeguard women's physical health, mental health care, and their well-being. So there's a lot of factors that go into the entire facet of parenthood and planned or unplanned parenthood. I mean, it's something that we could just endlessly talk about. Oh my God. But in regards to both your experiences and both your immense knowledge, and I'm so grateful for everything that you do and that you've done. Something that we ask a lot of our guests is there a book, or is there a piece of literature, or is there something that you've recently listened to, be it a podcast or whatever, that inspires you, or that has changed your life and somehow inspired you to do the work that you do? And it by a woman, because we're so surrounded by literature by men. It's just women inspiring women. And is there something that has inspired you by a woman?
Well, I actually only tend to read women anymore. It's actually very rare that there'll be a book on my shelf by a man that I've bought, and they tend to be gifts. But for me, it's probably when you sent me that question, it was Vicky Phelan. I found her book
incredible.
Moving. I think she's an incredible woman, but I also think her legacy is just still so untold, because she just so very clearly stood up and said, I will not accept this. And she didn't bang the table, she didn't do anything, she just stood up very simply and said, I will not accept this for myself or for anybody else. And I think that has absolutely helped me. I would have felt very voiceless and powerless after I had my first daughter, and she definitely helped me find my voice again and to be able to step into this campaign. And her book, if anybody hasn't read it, is just, I just loved it. I just found, she is just like us, she's just like everybody, and it's just about having that boundary of saying, no, that's not good enough and I won't accept it. And I think if women were able to do that in every aspect of their life, we would be in a very different space, but it's not something we're taught is the nice thing to do.
Yeah, I love that you've mentioned Vicky, because Vicky inspired a lot of the campaign and activism work that I've done and that my colleagues have done in Why Not Her. And we actually got the Irish Examiner on International Women's Day this year, did the 100 Women Changing Ireland, and I was so honored to be featured in it as well. But I was more or less beside Vicky, and I was like, oh my God. And I got it blown up for her. She was in America at the time, but I got in touch with her and then got the family address. And because she's so she's just so, again, it's just this solidarity and this, camaraderie that is just so important amongst women, especially over COVID, where we've been more or less voiceless. And I just thought she was such a wonderful person. And, we got it all blown up and so she can put it in a frame and stuff. And, she's just such an incredible human being. So I'm so glad that you brought her up, because she was that for so many of us within this collective. And, it's to know that she's inspired so many other people and so many other collectives and movements it really speaks very, very loud, And what about yourself, Margaret?
So for me, I'm choosing Emily Pine's book, Note to Self. Equally, if anyone hasn't read it, please do. It's absolutely beautiful. And she speaks about lots of different areas, but she does have a section called the baby years, and just speaks again so openly and honestly about lots of different positions and experiences on the topic. But there's just one line from it that I love, and I think applies to lots of things. That I am done marking myself through absence. I am done using the word failure about my body. I am done living and writing that story. And I think it's so easy, I suppose, to maybe get stuck in the negative, and all the negative is valid. But to try and see, to take the focus off some of the whether it's absence, whether other people are telling us it's absent from our lives, or whether it feels absent to ourselves as well. So I really, really love her writing in her book.
It's a beautiful book. It's such a great choice, Margaret. I think there's so much richness to it.
Stunning, yeah.
I'm going to throw another one in, as Margaret mentioned Emily Pine, Note to Self, but one that I loved as well was Doireann Grief's A Ghost in the Throat. I just think it's a really remarkable, it's so hard to describe the book, but I think particularly if you are in that transition into new parenthood, there's so much of it that will resonate, but it's just so beautifully written, and there's so many different themes and intersections in her writing, and the cadence of it, it's magical and beautiful, and it will never leave my bookshelf because I just want to be able to leaf through it all of the time.
Yeah, fantastic. I was actually speaking with Clodagh Finn, who's another amazing author from Ireland, and she has a book, Through Her Eyes, which celebrates women throughout Irish history, and it's something that I think a lot of us really need to look at, because again, there hasn't really been many. Constance Markievicz is probably the only one that some of us may have been lucky enough to hear in whispers. But yeah, there's certainly an absence of the women's narrative and the women's story and, you know, life through the eyes of a woman, because as you said yourself, Linda, there earlier on, a lot of it is told and viewed upon as from a man's perspective, you know. They're fantastic books there to recommend. So thank you very much. Look, I talk to you all day, but I know we're all powerhouse women and we all have to get back to our jobs. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today at the Why Not Her podcast, and continued success in your careers. And thanks so much for, you know, giving advice and telling your story about, you know, parenting and your experience as well, Linda, as well, especially as your experience, and Margaret, your expertise in the area. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us, Linda.
Thanks very much.